Okay, so in this session, what we're going to do, we're actually going to draw faces. Faces are very distinct from person to person, but they all have certain general principles. Um, and some of them are as simple as, how far things are spaced, where you find, what do you have in a face? Two eyes, a nose, ears, hair, a neck, forehead, cheeks, lips. And those are very basic points to remember when you draw a person, because they're very easy to overlook, especially when you don't have practice. Most people start with grids, or with a picture, and that's a very good way to start in practice. Right now, I'm just going to freeform a person. The way I like to start is with a nose, and then I draw my eyes, and then I'll start drawing the rest of it. Some people like to do the outline first, and that's great. But one of the things with drawing the outline first is you kind of lose your flexibility to form the things inside, because if you draw all your outside first and then you go put in eyes and a nose and they're not in the right place, you basically are very, very, very lost, and you have to start again. When you draw your nose and eyes first, you can readjust the outsides and make sure they're even. So I'm usually going to start with the nose, and I'm going to start the long way. And my nose, usually, most noses have a little curve on the bottom part. And then you have the sides, your nostrils, which usually is a little bit of a shorter curve. Comes back up. Sometimes they're short and stout like this, because people have a little bit rounder noses, or you can have them and they're actually a little bit thinner and they go further. And this nose part as well goes out a little bit more. And then as you go up, it kind of narrows out. You don't draw the whole line. You want to leave some space, because you're going to end up shading and fading here. And you reach the point where you're going to start drawing your eyes. And here it kind of curves and flares out. These lines we usually erase afterwards, but they're usually good for guide. Now you have the same thing on both sides. Another thing to consider is there is space between your eyes. It's the space in your nose. Most people, this space is as long as your eye is. So if your eye is this long, you want to have that much space between your nose and the other eye. So approximately, I'll probably have about that space. So my eye wants to be about that big. But that's from end to end, not, the eyeball and pupil in the middle. You gotta remember, there's the white area, there's a dark area, and then there's the black area in the very middle of your eye. And these lines are not where the eye is, but that's where your eyebrow is gonna be. So most people will start turning their paper, kind of adjust to where they're gonna draw. And the top of the eye is gonna be usually going to go up and down as a curve, and it just curves a little bit at the end. Here in the middle, there's a little bit of a loop to connect them, and then your bottom one is a more, it's usually a flatter curve, or actually even flatter than that. But the reason I'm making it double is you actually have the little space for your lid, for your eyelid, where those tears come from, and that's usually the little spot right here. And your top eyelid comes over your other eye. As well, your eye isn't the whole thing. You actually have little spaces at the end to actually do a little round curve and a round curve on the other side. And if you imagine it like if it was a full circle, I would probably be around there to about there. And the reason I'm doing this right now, so you see your eye actually ends inside around where your eyebrow is. And on the bottom, that's where your eye socket ends. That's where you usually have the so-called cheekbone. So this is kind of where you start doing a little bit of the lines. They kind of give you that impression. And up here, most people's eyebrows are going to go up and then down. And that line is just a general direction. And just reforms my hair and just layer it. And that's just a general eye right there. And as far as the eyelid, you also have the small bulges on top, on the sides. And that just keeps adding to the form. And in the middle, remember you have your pupil. And then you have the very dark part in the very middle. And most people's pupils are not just one color. If you actually look, you have small lines. Usually black in those eyes. So I'm putting the lines, then I'll shade a little bit, just so it adds to it. And we redraw our lines. Make it a little bit more clear. The ends are darkened, and there you have a basic eye. We already have the shape of our nose, and like I said, this is about 1/3 of our head. So when we want to go this measurement, we want to skip it up, and this should be the top of our head when we draw it. And when we do that, we scoot down, and that should be our chin as well. And those are just approximations. They don't have to be extremely accurate, but they guide us. Okay, after this, like I said, we have the little cheekbone here. Over here with our nose, we have a little line that connects the inside of our cheek and our mouth. Between our mouth and nose, we have this little part of our lip that kind of opens up a little bit like a trapezoid, and our middle of our lips are usually a little point. You can think of lips kind of like a flat M. Or a flattened M, and you see it right here. But you'll redraw these things and kind of make them even a lot. The bottom of the lip as well is a little bit less of a flat M, but it's still a flat M. That goes towards the ends. And one big difference between males and females will be how dark you draw the lips. The bottom of the lip usually kind of rounded off. The ends around. These connect. Like I said, it all depends how dark you want to decide to draw it all. And female, usually top lip can be thin or thick. It just depends on the specific person and if they've had surgery or not. But we also have small lines, and those are kind of where our lips keep bending or spacing in and out. Some are very prominent, some not as much. And they're on the top lip as well. And of course we'll have some color and shade as well later. But that will all kind of come in. Your chin as well. See, I've actually made this space a little bit small. That's okay. Chin usually has a little top part. Some people have dimples, which are like indentations. And then you have a little bone here. From here, we start pulling back, because this part is actually pointing forward. You start pulling it back, and you're going to get to the point where it's going to start going up, but after a round edge, which we usually call a jawbone. With some people, it's a lot, more obvious than others. And again, your cheekbone here kind of flares out a little bit. As far as here, sometimes you have a little bit of the mark. This line right here, you'll notice it on, especially when we draw something like a skeleton. Sometimes a little bit more of a line there. This line, I'll move it down a little bit. Here you get a little bit of an indentation, and that's kind of where your teeth are at. At the ends as well. Here usually most people have their hairline kind of come down and over, and this hairline usually goes straight and a little bit back. But we also remember that people have ears. Your ears, the bottom, usually is over here by close to the bottom of your nose. With that, we don't make them huge because they actually are sideways, so you don't see as much of them. And it's not the typical C anymore. It's more like a dumbbell or a pulled out 8. And the top of your ear is going to go kind of close to the middle of your eye, to the top of your eye. This usually sticks out a little bit more on people. And again, remember, we have our hair that comes over it and behind it. And there, most people's heads have a very simple shape to it. And like we said, we get to the forehead, and that brings us to hairlines. Like I said, you need to leave space for a forehead. Not forget people have those. And it's usually very safe to just kind of curve the top of people's heads. Sometimes they have, a little bit more hair on one side, so it flares up. And you see I'm focusing more on half of the person because most of the other sides are going to be the exact same. Let's see. And for the most part with this gentleman, which I've turned into a gentleman, I'm giving him a kind of a swooshed hairline, which can divide around here. And that's all going to be part of how we shade and color it. Then you can also come in and erase. And I'm leaving little spaces because these spaces actually help distinguish hair. So it's not just one long blob. But that's part of the coloring in with the hair. As well, usually in people's foreheads you have a little bit of marks for the bones. And first I color it in, draw it in, then I'll go in and erase it. Even it out, but making clear distinctions kind of help form the shape I want. That happens for a lot of these things. Yes, and we know some people have what we call a double chin, and that's the extra kind of fat that we have around certain parts of our necks. And yes, we have necks for the most part. Men typically have more of a prominent, what we call an Adam's apple, and we kind of mark that sometimes the same way and shade it and then kind of erase. Still gives us the same effect. And some people will have, you know, some marks, pimples, draw them in, erase them a little bit, or they might actually have actual scars. And scars typically make a very different look on faces, and stitches as well. It's very clear there. Erase it a little bit because they are scars now. And the more you draw, the more pencil actually gets on your paper, so it makes it easier for you to draw some of these lines with your actual eraser as well. But these are all basics of drawing a person. You see, mine's actually a little bit long, and then we can actually change that look very easily by changing it there. As you see, his face completely changes. You can make it even different by just by there you're changing some things very simply. If we make his lips much darker, we start changing his gender just by going darker. And as well, we'll start making some of these features more prominent. Erase some of the wrinkles. around the eyelids. And that all affects how someone looks. You see big erasing marks. Basically, getting rid of someone's